I'm sitting here on my front porch on a Tuesday morning in spring, and you know what? I never thought I'd be telling anyone this story, but I'm about to, because someone out there needs to hear it, and maybe it'll help you see something you've been missing in your own life. My husband said his ex would always be family, even after we married, and I smiled when he said it. I was already disappearing, and I didn't even know it yet. So please, stick with me through what I'm about to tell you. This is hard to say out loud, but if my story can help even one person recognize what's happening to them before it's too late, then it's worth the discomfort. If you could hit that like button and subscribe, it would mean the world to me, because this message needs to reach people who are living through something similar right now. People who think they're the only ones feeling this way. When I married Theodore, I thought I was getting everything I'd prayed for. I was 35 years old, living in this block of apartment buildings in Memphis, Tennessee, where kids ran around outside from morning till the streetlights came on. I was raising my 2 grandchildren in subsidized housing that had these long hallways and fluorescent lights that made everything look a little bit like a hospital, a little bit like nowhere you'd want to call home. But it was home. The grits were bubbling on the stove every morning like they always did, and I had gospel music playing softly from an old radio in the corner, the kind with the dial you had to turn just right to get the station to come in clear. I was doing okay. Not great, but I was making it work. And then Theodore walked into the church service one Sunday, and he had this quiet confidence about him. He smiled at me during the hymn. He wore nice shoes that didn't have scuffs on them. He drove a car that didn't make that grinding noise when you turned the key. I was lonely, I'll admit that. After my first husband passed, after everything I'd been through raising those babies, I just wanted to feel like someone wanted me around. I remember that first conversation after church, standing in the parking lot while other folks filtered past us, getting into their cars. The June heat was thick enough to swim through, but I didn't want to leave. He asked about my life, my grandchildren, what I did with my time. He listened in this way that made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered, like my ordinary life of grits and gospel music and quilting blankets was interesting, was worthy of attention. "What made you start quilting?" he asked. And nobody had ever asked me that before. They'd admired the blankets, sure, but nobody had asked where it came from. "My grandmother taught me," I told him, feeling the memory wash over me warm and sweet like honey. Said every woman should know how to take scraps and make something beautiful. Said it was a lesson for life, not just sewing. He nodded like he understood what she meant, like he saw the metaphor. And I thought, this man gets it. This man sees deeper than the surface. Looking back now, I wonder if he saw me as scraps that day. Something broken down that he could reshape into whatever he wanted. The first 3 months were beautiful. He brought flowers, the kind you get from the grocery store, but they still made me feel seen. He helped me with the quilting blankets I make for each of my grandchildren, holding the fabric while I cut, asking which colors I thought they'd like. We talked about dreams. I told him about the Genesis G90 in elegant bronze that I saw in a magazine once, just a silly fantasy, something I'd never have, but it made me smile to talk about it. He listened like what I said actually mattered. He took me to nice restaurants, places with cloth napkins and menus that didn't have pictures. He held doors open. He introduced me to his coworkers at a company picnic, his hand on the small of my back, calling me his lady in a way that made me feel chosen, special, like I'd won something I didn't even know I'd entered. We'd sit in his car after dates, talking until midnight, the radio playing soft R&B, his voice low and intimate in the darkness. He told me about his divorce, how painful it had been, how he'd tried to make it work, but sometimes people just grow apart. It sounded reasonable. Sad, but reasonable. He painted himself as someone who'd loved deeply and lost, someone who was ready to try again with the right person. "I think you might be that person," he said one night, taking my hand across the center console. "I think God brought me to that church for a reason." I wanted to believe him so badly. I wanted to believe that at 35, living in subsidized housing, raising grandchildren, struggling to make ends meet, I could still be someone's answered prayer. That I wasn't used up or too old or too tired or too ordinary. But then he said it, just casual, like he was mentioning the weather. My ex-wife will always be family. That doesn't change just because I married you. I should have paid attention to that moment. I should have asked what he meant, what that looked like in practice, where I fit into that equation. But I didn't. I told myself I was being mature, understanding, modern. I was 35 years old, and I didn't want to seem jealous or small, or like one of those women who couldn't handle their man having a past. So I smiled, and I said, "Of course, honey. That's nice that you have that kind of relationship." God, what a fool I was. What started as phone calls became dinners. What became dinners became him leaving early from work to pick her up somewhere, never explaining where or why. The exclusion didn't happen all at once. It was slower than that, like water wearing down stone. It was him going into the bedroom and closing the door when his phone rang, his voice dropping to a murmur I couldn't quite make out no matter how still I stood in the hallway. It was conversations that stopped the second I walked into the kitchen. Him looking at me with this expression like I'd interrupted something private, something I had no right to intrude on even though it was happening in my own home. It was me not being invited to his work events because she would be there, and it might be awkward. "I just don't want to make things complicated," he'd say, already putting on his jacket, already leaving. "You understand, right?" And I'd say yes. I'd say yes because saying no felt like starting a fight, and I didn't have the energy for fights. I'd say yes because I wanted to be the cool wife, the understanding one, the one who wasn't threatened by ghosts. But she wasn't a ghost. She was present in our marriage in ways I wasn't. She knew things about his day I didn't know. She got calls returned immediately while mine went to voicemail. She had access I was denied, and I was supposed to smile about it, supposed to be grateful he was such a good man that he maintained healthy relationships with his ex. The silent treatment started around month 5 of our marriage. The first time, it lasted 3 days. I'd asked why he needed to take her to a doctor's appointment when she had family, friends, a whole life of her own. "She asked me," he said, like that explained everything. "I'm not going to abandon someone who needs help." The implication being that I would, that my question revealed some fundamental flaw in my character, some smallness, some cruelty. He didn't yell. He didn't slam doors. He just stopped talking to me. He'd come home from work, eat dinner in silence, watch TV in the bedroom with the door closed. He'd respond to practical questions with one-word answers. Fine. Sure. Whatever. After 3 days, I apologized, not because I thought I'd done something wrong, but because the silence was suffocating me, pressing down on my chest until I couldn't breathe right, couldn't think right, couldn't be right in my own skin. It was like I was slowly being erased from my own marriage, fading out like old photographs left in the sun. I stopped quilting for a while. My hands just wouldn't move right. I'd sit there with the fabric and scissors, trying to remember why I'd chosen these colors, what pattern I was supposed to be making. But my mind felt like static. The radio sat quiet more often than not. The grits burned on the stove because I'd forget I was cooking them. My grandchildren would ask if I was okay, and I'd smile and say yes. Everything's fine, just tired, just a long week. But they knew. Kids always know when you're lying. The thing that kept me trapped, I think, was resignation. I was getting older, heading toward my late 40s, and I told myself this was what marriage was supposed to look like. That I was too old to start over, too tired to fight, too worn down to imagine anything different. That maybe I was being unreasonable. That maybe I was making mountains out of molehills, like my grandmother used to say. That he was a good man, really, and I should just accept the way things were. I had my grandchildren to think about. I had this apartment with its fluorescent lights. I had routine and gospel music and grits in the morning. And changing all that? That felt impossible, like trying to move a mountain with a teaspoon. So I started giving him money. Not because he asked directly at first, but because I thought if I showed him how much I valued him, how much I was willing to sacrifice, maybe he'd pull away from her. Maybe he'd choose me. Maybe he'd finally see me standing right there in front of him. The first time, he mentioned needing help with a car repair. $500. "I'll pay you back next week," he said. Next week came and went. I didn't bring it up. Bringing it up felt like not trusting. And not trusting felt like failing as a wife. Then it was helping with his mother's medical bills. Then a loan to a friend who was in trouble. Then an investment opportunity that couldn't wait. Each time, the amount got bigger. Each time, the explanation got vaguer. Each time I gave it to him without asking questions, because asking felt like doubting, and doubting felt like destroying what little we had left. I gave him money from my pension, little bits at a time. I gave him my savings, $4,000 that I'd scraped together over 5 years of cutting coupons and skipping meals and saying no to my grandchildren when they asked for things. I gave him cash when he asked, never questioning where it was going, never asking why he needed it, because asking felt like not trusting, and not trusting felt like failing as a wife. The rotary phone on the wall, the one that still works because I never saw a reason to replace it, it rang less and less. My friends stopped calling, or maybe I stopped answering. I can't remember which came first. I'd started making excuses not to see people, not to go to church functions, not to participate in the quilting circle I'd been part of for years. It was easier to be alone than to pretend everything was fine. Easier to avoid questions than to lie about answers. Then one morning, I went to the bank to deposit my pension check. The teller looked at me strange when I asked about my account balance. She went to get the manager. The manager sat me down in that little room with the fake plant and the motivational poster about dreams, and she told me that my account had been flagged, that there had been unusual withdrawals, that someone had been taking money, not all at once but steadily, like bleeding me dry one cut at a time. Not Theodore, she clarified. His name wasn't on the account. But the withdrawals matched dates when I'd given him cash, when he'd asked me to help him with something, when he'd said he was in trouble and needed just a little to get through. "Mrs. Williams," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "these patterns are concerning. The withdrawals have been increasing in frequency and amount. In the last 3 months alone, you've withdrawn nearly $6,000 in cash. Your account is nearly empty." I stared at the numbers on the paper she'd pushed across the desk. My pension deposits, regular as clockwork on the 1st of each month. And then the withdrawals, scattered throughout the weeks. 50 here, 200 there, 500, 800, 1,000. When you saw them all lined up like that, the pattern was obvious. The truth was obvious. I'd been robbed by my own willingness to be loved. "Do you have access to other accounts?" she asked. "Savings? Anything we should check?" I thought about the savings account I'd opened years ago, the one for emergencies, the one I'd promised my grandchildren I'd never touch except for college or medical crises, the one Theodore didn't know about. Or at least, I hoped he didn't know about. "Check it," I whispered. "Check it now." She typed on her computer, her fingers flying across the keys, and I watched her face. I watched the way her expression shifted from concerned to alarmed, and I knew before she said anything. "That account has been accessed as well," she said carefully. "There have been withdrawals over the past 2 months. Did you authorize—" "No." The word came out sharp, final. "No, I didn't." My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even sign the paperwork she gave me. I sat there in that little room for 20 minutes after she left, just staring at the numbers on the printout, trying to make them make sense, trying to understand how I'd let this happen, trying to calculate how much I'd lost, not just in money, but in dignity, in self-respect, in the ability to look at myself in the mirror. I couldn't even drive home at first. I sat in the bank parking lot and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my first husband's funeral. Big gulping sobs that made my whole body hurt. I cried for the woman I'd been before Theodore. The one who'd made it work even when it was hard, who'd raised those babies and paid her bills and never asked anyone for anything. I cried for the woman I'd become, so desperate for love that she'd given away everything she had and called it marriage. A woman knocked on my car window at some point, asked if I was okay, if I needed help. I waved her away, said I was fine, everything's fine. Just got some bad news. She looked at me with this expression, pity mixed with recognition, like she'd been exactly where I was sitting and knew there was nothing she could say that would help. When I finally got back to the apartment, the kids were at school and Theodore was at work, and I was alone in that fluorescent silence. I walked into our bedroom, and I looked in the mirror. Really looked. Not just a glance while I was brushing my teeth or putting on lipstick. And I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked smaller than she was, like she'd been folded up and put away. Hollowed out, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide anymore. Her yellow cardigan, the sunny one with the pearl buttons that I'd bought to feel pretty. To feel like someone worth looking at, it hung on her like it was 2 sizes too big. Her eyes had this look in them like she'd given up expecting anything good to happen ever again. That's when I snapped. That's when something in me, something I thought had died years ago, said no. Not anymore. Not one more day of this. I became my own detective after that. I called the bank again the next morning and asked questions I'd been too afraid to ask before. I wrote down dates and amounts in a notebook I kept hidden under the mattress. I pulled out that old rotary phone on the wall and I called a lawyer whose number I found in the church bulletin, my hands shaking so bad I had to dial 3 times before I got it right. The lawyer's receptionist answered on the 3rd ring, her voice pleasant and professional. "Henderson and Associates, how may I help you?" "I need to speak to a lawyer about financial abuse," I said, and hearing those words come out of my mouth felt like stepping off a cliff. Like once I said them, there was no taking them back, no pretending everything was fine. "I'll connect you with Mrs. Henderson," the receptionist said. "She handles these cases." Mrs. Henderson picked up 30 seconds later, and her voice was warm but no nonsense, the voice of someone who'd heard every story and wasn't shocked by any of them anymore. "Tell me what's happening," she said, and I did. I told her everything, words tumbling out in a rush, afraid if I stopped, I'd lose my nerve. The marriage, the ex-wife, the exclusion, the money, the bank accounts, the withdrawals, the discovery, all of it. She listened without interrupting, and when I finally ran out of words, she said something I didn't expect. "You're not the first person who's called me about Theodore Williams." The words hit me like cold water. "What?" "I can't discuss other clients," she said carefully, "but I can tell you that you're not alone in this experience, and I can help you. Are you safe right now? Is he in the house with you?" "No, he's at work." "Good. Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to secure your finances, today, right now, before he comes home. Do you have an account he doesn't know about?" I started crying again, not the big gulping sobs from yesterday, but quiet tears that slid down my face while I tried to keep my voice steady. "He got into my savings. I don't know how. I never told him about it." "Bank statements," she said immediately. "Mail, old documents, or he may have accessed your information when you weren't looking. It happens more often than you'd think. But here's what matters now. We stop the bleeding before we worry about what's already lost. Can you get to a bank today?" I didn't tell Theodore. I just started making phone calls in the afternoon when he was at work, sitting at the kitchen table with my notebook and my pen and my gospel music turned down low so I could concentrate. The lawyer was a woman about my age, maybe a little older, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense way of speaking. She told me to do something that terrified me more than anything I'd ever done. She said, block his access to that account, now, today. So I did. I went to the bank that same afternoon and I changed everything. New account, new passwords, new everything. The bank manager who'd shown me the printouts the day before helped me move the small amount of money I had left into a new account, one with protections, one that required 2 forms of ID and a security question Theodore would never be able to answer. "We see this a lot," she said quietly while we waited for the paperwork to process. "Financial abuse is one of the most common forms of control and one of the hardest to recognize because it happens gradually. You think you're helping someone you love. You don't realize you're being systematically depleted until there's nothing left." "How do I make sure this never happens again?" I asked. "You're already doing it," she said. "You're here. You're asking for help. You're taking action. That's everything." When Theodore came home that evening, he asked about money like he always did, casual, like it was nothing. "Hey, baby, I need about 300 for tomorrow. Got a thing I need to handle." I said, "No more." Just that, no more. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Then he laughed, like I was joking, like I couldn't possibly be serious. When he realized I meant it, he didn't speak to me for a week. Then the silent treatment turned into something else. He started saying I was crazy, that I was ruining everything, that I was being selfish and ungrateful and cruel, that after everything he'd done for me, this was how I repaid him, that I was making problems where there weren't any, that I was paranoid and jealous and bitter. "You've changed," he said one night, standing in the kitchen doorway while I washed dishes, his voice cold and accusatory. "You used to be sweet. You used to be understanding. Now you're just like every other bitter woman who can't let go of the past." But I didn't budge. I'd found something in that mirror, something I thought I'd lost. I'd found my spine. Spring was coming by then. That tentative spring we get in Memphis, when you're not sure if winter's really done with you yet. The windows in the apartment building finally opened, and life started to feel possible again in a way it hadn't in years. I started doing something I'd been too afraid to do before. I started telling people. I told my church first, in a meeting with the pastor and 2 deacons. I brought my notebook with the dates and amounts. I brought the bank statements. I told them everything, not leaving anything out, not making excuses for him or for myself. Pastor Williams, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for speaking truth, even when it was uncomfortable, listened to my whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Sister, I want you to know something," she said. "What you've described is abuse. Financial abuse, emotional abuse, manipulation. And I want you to know that this church will support you, whatever you decide to do next. We will not pressure you to stay in this marriage. We will not tell you to pray harder or submit more or be more understanding. We will help you be safe." I started crying again, but this time it was different. It was relief. It was the feeling of being believed, being supported, being told that what I'd experienced was real and wrong and not my fault. Then I told my neighbors, the ones I'd been hiding from, the ones I'd been too ashamed to face. I told them in the laundry room, in the hallway, on the front steps, where we used to sit and talk before I'd started disappearing. And you know what happened? They started telling me their stories. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. Turns out, there were others. Women who'd given him money. Women who'd been promised things. Women who'd been slowly erased, just like me. One of them, a woman from his workplace, she came forward with her own story. She'd been afraid to say anything, afraid no one would believe her, afraid she'd lose her job. But when she heard I'd spoken up, she found the courage. Her name was Denise, and she worked in the same financial firm as Theodore, 2 floors down. She came to my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, nervous, wringing her hands, looking over her shoulder like she expected him to appear any moment. "I heard you went to the church," she said, standing in my doorway. "I heard you told them about Theodore, about the money." "I did," I said. "Do you want to come in?" She did. She sat on my couch and told me her story, and it was so similar to mine it made me sick. The charm, the attention, the gradual asks for money, the promises to pay it back. The way he made you feel special and then slowly made you feel like you were crazy for questioning anything. He told me he was getting divorced, she said. He said you two were separated, that you'd both moved on, but were handling it quietly for the sake of your grandchildren. He said he was in love with me, that as soon as the divorce was final, we'd be together. I should have been angry. I should have felt betrayed. But all I felt was this deep, weary sadness. Sadness for her, for me, for every woman who'd believed his lies. "How much did you give him?" I asked. $8,000, she whispered. Over the course of a year, he said it was for lawyer fees, for the divorce, for a fresh start for both of us. "I gave him everything I had," I said. "My pension, my savings, money I'd saved from my grandchildren's college." He took it all, and I let him, because I thought that's what love looked like. We cried together that afternoon. Two women who'd been conned by the same man, finding solidarity in our shared pain. Apparently, Theodore had been doing this for years. Multiple women, multiple accounts. The bank had flagged unusual activity across several accounts, all connected to him in one way or another. His company found out he'd been embezzling, moving small amounts of money around, nothing big enough to trigger immediate alarms, but steady enough to add up to serious wealth over time. The investigation moved fast after that, faster than I expected. Within 2 months, he'd lost his position at the financial firm. His license to work in financial services was revoked. His reputation, the thing he'd cared about more than anything, more than me, more than truth, it was gone. He moved out before they even asked him to. He just packed his things one Saturday morning while I was at the grocery store, and when I came home, he was gone. No note. No explanation, just empty closet space and silence. And you know what? I didn't cry. I stood there in that bedroom with the spring light coming through the window, and I felt lighter than I had in years. That spring, Memphis came alive in a way I'd forgotten it could. The windows stayed open. The gospel music played loud instead of soft. Kids ran around outside, and their laughter didn't sound like noise anymore. It sounded like life, like possibility, like the world going on whether you were paying attention or not. I did something that week that I'd been putting off for months. I found the watch Theodore had given me, the expensive one he'd presented at Christmas, like it was proof of his love, like it meant something. I'd kept it in the back of my drawer because throwing it away felt wrong, felt like giving up on the marriage, felt like admitting defeat. I donated it to the church. I handed it to the pastor and I said, "Someone else can use this. Someone who needs the money more than I need the reminder." And something shifted in me when I let that go. Something fundamental, like cutting a rope I'd been hanging on to even though it was dragging me under. I started quilting again that summer. Not just for my grandchildren, though I still made them blankets, each one in their favorite colors. But I started quilting for myself too, making patterns that didn't have to mean anything, that didn't have to be perfect, that were just beautiful because I said they were. I made a quilt that summer that was all yellows and oranges and reds, colors like fire, like sunrise, like something beginning instead of ending. I didn't plan the pattern. I just cut fabric and sewed it together, letting my hands remember what my mind had forgotten, that I could create things, that I could make something beautiful out of scraps, that my grandmother had been right all along about what quilting could teach you. Each piece of fabric was something I'd reclaimed, yellow from the cardigan I'd worn when I didn't recognize myself in the mirror, orange from a dress I'd bought for one of Theodore's work events that he'd canceled at the last minute, red from a scarf my first husband had given me, the one I'd put away because Theodore said it made me look like I was trying too hard. I took all those memories, all that pain, and I stitched them into something new. When I finished that quilt, I hung it on my bedroom wall, where I could see it every morning when I woke up. A reminder that transformation was possible, that you could take what was broken and make it whole again, different than before but still beautiful, maybe more beautiful because of what it had survived. I picked up a paintbrush for the first time since high school. I bought a set at the dollar store and I painted on cardboard because I couldn't afford canvas yet, but it didn't matter. The act of creating something, of making something that hadn't existed before, it fed something in me I didn't even know was starving. My first painting was terrible. Just abstract swirls of color that didn't look like anything, didn't represent anything, just existed because I'd made it exist. But it was mine. Nobody had told me what to paint or how to paint it. Nobody had judged whether it was good enough or valuable enough or worth the space it took up. It just was, because I said it was. I painted every evening after the kids went to bed, sitting at the kitchen table with newspapers spread out to catch the drips, gospel music playing, letting my mind go quiet, and just feeling the brush move across the cardboard. Sometimes I painted colors. Sometimes I painted shapes. Sometimes I tried to paint feelings, emotions I didn't have words for, experiences that lived in my body more than my brain. I wrote in a journal every morning before the grits were done, just a few sentences about what I was feeling, what I was noticing, what I was becoming. The first entry in that journal said, "Today I am afraid and I am brave at the same time. I don't know how that's possible, but it's true." The second entry said, "I looked at myself in the mirror this morning and I recognized her. Just for a moment, just a flash, but I saw who I used to be looking back at me." The entries got longer as weeks went by. Pages and pages of thoughts I'd been too scared to think, feelings I'd been too numb to feel, observations about the world that I'd stopped noticing somewhere along the way. I wrote about my grandmother and the lessons she'd tried to teach me. I wrote about my first husband and how he'd loved me in ways Theodore never had, quietly and steadily, and without needing me to disappear to make room for him. I wrote about my grandchildren and what I wanted them to learn from watching me rebuild my life. I wrote about God and faith and whether I still believed in prayer after praying so hard for my marriage to work only to watch it reveal itself as a con. I looked at apartments online, in the historic neighborhoods with character and charm, the ones I used to drive past and think, maybe someday, but never really believed it. I wasn't ready to move yet, but I was ready to imagine it. And that felt like progress. The rotary phone on the wall started ringing again. My friends, the ones I'd pushed away or hidden from, they started checking in. At first, I didn't know what to say. How do you explain where you've been when you're not even sure yourself? But they were patient. They waited. And slowly, I learned how to talk again, how to laugh again, how to be present in my own life again. My grandchildren noticed. One of them, the oldest, she asked me one day why I seemed different. I told her, I remembered who I was before I forgot. She didn't understand, but someday she will. Someday when she's older and someone tries to make her smaller, she'll remember her grandmother who refused to stay small. And maybe that'll be enough. But life wasn't finished testing me yet. Just when I thought the worst was over, just when I thought I could breathe again, one more blow came. It was a Sunday morning, 6 months after Theodore moved out. I was getting ready for church, putting on that yellow cardigan because it fit right again, because I'd stopped shrinking. The doorbell rang. It was one of his family members, his sister, someone I'd always gotten along with. She stood there on my doorstep with this look on her face, and I knew before she even opened her mouth that something bad was coming. She told me Theodore had been talking, spreading lies about me, telling people I'd stolen from him, that I was mentally unstable, that I'd made up stories to destroy him. He'd crafted this whole narrative where he was the victim and I was the villain, and he was telling it to anyone who would listen. Some people believed him. People I thought knew me, people I thought would see through it. They believed him. I heard it through the grapevine, saw it in the way certain folks at church wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. It hurt. I won't lie about that. It hurt in a way I wasn't expecting because I thought I was done hurting. I thought I'd built up enough armor, enough distance, enough self-knowledge to be immune. But here's the thing about transformation. The thing nobody tells you. It's not a straight line. It's not one moment of clarity, and then everything's fine forever. It's a series of tests, and each one shows you how much you've really changed. Because this time, when the blow came, I responded differently. I didn't defend myself frantically. I didn't try to convince people who'd already made up their minds. I didn't lose sleep or stop eating or fall apart. I just kept living. I kept quilting. I kept painting. I kept writing in my journal every morning. I kept showing up as myself, the real me, the one I'd been digging out from under years of resignation and silence and slow erasure. And something happened that Theodore didn't expect. The truth has a way of coming out, especially when enough people start comparing stories. His lies didn't hold up under scrutiny. The timeline didn't match. The facts didn't support his version of events. His former employer released a statement about the embezzlement investigation. Quietly, not making a big deal of it, but enough that people knew. His professional reputation, the thing he'd valued more than integrity, more than truth, more than me, it was gone for good. The licenses he'd lost, they weren't coming back. The career he'd built, it was over. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just watched from a distance and thought about justice, about how it comes in ways you don't expect, in forms you didn't ask for. That was my final test, watching him fall and feeling nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even pity. Just nothing. Just the awareness that his life was his to live, and my life was mine, and they didn't intersect anymore. I'd passed. I'd become someone who didn't need his downfall to feel whole. By the time fall came around again, I'd done something I never thought I'd do. I'd signed a lease on a new apartment in the historic district I'd been dreaming about, in a building with high ceilings and big windows and neighbors who said good morning when they saw you. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't the Genesis G90 in elegant bronze, not by a long shot, but it was mine, truly mine. Paid for with money I earned, filled with things I chose, decorated in a way that made sense to nobody but me. The building was from the 1920s, with original hardwood floors that creaked in certain spots and crown molding that somebody had taken care to preserve. The windows were tall, almost floor to ceiling, and they let in light that changed throughout the day, golden in the morning, silver in the afternoon, soft and amber in the evening. My apartment was on the second floor, a corner unit with windows on 2 walls. The kitchen was tiny, barely room for one person to turn around, but it had a vintage stove that reminded me of my grandmother's house. The bathroom had one of those old clawfoot tubs that took forever to fill, but felt like luxury when you finally sank into the hot water. The living room was just big enough for a couch and a chair and my quilting supplies. The bedroom was small and square with a closet that had probably been added sometime in the 50s. None of it was modern or updated or magazine-worthy. But it felt like home in a way the subsidized housing never had, in a way Theodore's presence had prevented anywhere from feeling. I brought my quilts. I brought my paints. I brought that old rotary phone because it still worked and because it reminded me of making those first scary calls to the lawyer, of choosing myself even when it felt impossible. My grandchildren helped me move. We made a day of it, ordering pizza, playing music loud, laughing at how I'd managed to accumulate so much fabric for quilting over the years. "Grandma, why do you need 17 different shades of blue?" my youngest asked, holding up bundles of fabric. "Because they're all different," I told her. "That one's sky blue, that one's ocean blue, that one's sad blue, that one's happy blue. You need all the blues." She looked at me like I was crazy, but she was smiling. "Okay, Grandma, whatever you say." One of them found an old photo, tucked in the back of a drawer I'd forgotten to empty. It was from early in my marriage to Theodore, both of us smiling, his arm around my shoulder. I looked happy in it. Young, hopeful. I almost threw it away. Then I looked closer and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. My smile didn't quite reach my eyes, even then, even in the beginning. Some part of me had known, had seen, had recognized that something wasn't right. I kept the photo, not as a memento of him, but as a reminder of that woman who knew something was wrong but didn't trust herself enough to listen, as a promise to never ignore that voice again. The first night in my new place, I made grits on the stove, the same way I always had, but they tasted different. Better somehow. Like they were mine again. Like I'd reclaimed something basic and essential. I hung my quilts on the walls, bright patches of color against white paint. I set up my art supplies in the corner where the light was good. I put my journal on the nightstand. And I slept. Really slept. The kind of deep, dreamless sleep you can only have when you're not waiting for the other shoe to drop, when you're not braced for the next blow, when you know you're safe because you made yourself safe. I discovered something in those months that nobody tells you about starting over in middle age. It's not about recapturing your youth or pretending the hard years didn't happen. It's about integration. Taking everything you've learned, all the pain and loss and disappointment and betrayal, and letting it make you wiser instead of bitter, stronger instead of broken. I took a painting class at the community center. I was the oldest one there by 15 years, and I didn't care. I painted what I felt, not what I thought I should feel. The instructor said I had a natural eye for color, for composition, for telling stories without words. I started writing more, not just in my journal, but real pieces, essays about what I'd been through, stories about resilience and transformation. I shared some of them at a local writers group. People listened, some of them cried, some of them told me their own stories afterward, stories they'd never told anyone else. I learned something crucial in that historic neighborhood with its character and charm and its big windows that let in light. Community isn't just about proximity. It's about showing up authentically, about being willing to be seen, about offering what you have even when what you have is just your story, just your truth, just your hard-won wisdom. The seasons changed. Spring came around again. A full year since that morning, I'd gone to the bank and everything fell apart and came together all at once. I sat on my new front porch. Not the old front stoop where I used to sit alone while the neighborhood woke up, but a real porch with a chair I'd picked out myself and plants I was trying not to kill through neglect or overthinking. I thought about Theodore sometimes, not with anger or longing or anything that felt dangerous, just with a kind of distant curiosity about who he was now, where he'd ended up, whether he'd ever understood what he'd done. But those thoughts didn't last long. They were like clouds passing across the sky, there and then gone. I thought more about the woman I'd been, the one who'd smiled and said, "Of course, honey," when he told her his ex-wife would always be family. The one who'd given away her savings and her voice and her right to take up space in her own marriage. The one who'd looked in the mirror and hadn't recognized herself. That woman taught me everything I know now. She taught me through her mistakes, through her silence, through her slow disappearance. She taught me that resignation isn't the same as peace, that sacrifice without reciprocity is just loss, that being understanding doesn't mean being invisible. I owed her something. I owed her this new life, this apartment with good light, this ability to sleep through the night, this voice I'd found again. I owed her the responsibility to use what I'd learned, to share it with others who might be where she was. So I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I started speaking at churches, at community centers, at women's groups, not as an expert or a therapist or anyone with fancy credentials, just as someone who'd been through it and come out the other side. I told my story, all of it, the marriage, the money, the slow erasure, the discovery, the collapse, the fight back, the transformation. I didn't leave out the hard parts or the embarrassing parts or the parts where I'd made stupid choices. I told it straight. And every time, without fail, women came up to me afterward. Sometimes crying, sometimes angry, sometimes just relieved to hear someone else had lived through something similar. They told me their stories, the ones they'd been keeping secret, the ones they thought were too shameful to share. I learned something in those conversations that changed how I saw everything that had happened to me. My story wasn't unique. The details were mine, but the pattern was everywhere. Women who'd been erased, women who'd sacrificed everything, women who'd accepted treatment they'd never accept if they were watching it happen to someone else. And I learned something else, something that made me grateful in a way I never expected. I'd become my own ally. I'd become my own detective, my own advocate, my own rescue. No one had swooped in to save me. No perfect friend or wise mentor or dramatic intervention. Just me, deciding I was worth saving and then doing the work. That's what I want people to understand. That's what I need you to hear if you're going through something similar. You can be your own ally. You can investigate. You can ask questions. You can block access. You can tell the truth. You can walk away. You already have everything you need. Now it's been more than a year since I moved into this place. More than a year since Theodore lost his job and his licenses and his carefully constructed life. More than a year since I looked in the mirror and saw someone I recognized, someone I could respect, someone who wasn't going to disappear anymore. My grandchildren come over more now. We cooked together, all of us crowded into my small kitchen, making grits and laughing about nothing and everything. They ask me questions about life, about love, about how to know when something's right and when it's wrong. I tell them what I know. Trust that voice inside you that says something's not okay. That voice is older and wiser than you think. Listen to it. Honor it. Act on it, even when acting feels impossible. My gospel music still plays, louder now, filling the apartment with sound instead of just existing quietly in the background. The rotary phone on the wall has a place of honor now, not hidden but displayed, a reminder of the calls I made when I was terrified but determined, when I chose myself even though I'd spent years choosing everyone else. I think about that Genesis G90 sometimes, that elegant bronze dream car I saw in a magazine. I still don't have it. I probably never will. But here's what I've learned. The dream wasn't really about the car. It was about having dreams at all, about allowing myself to want something beautiful, about believing I deserved nice things. And I do deserve nice things. I deserve big windows and good light and quilts on the walls and plants on the porch. I deserve peaceful sleep and real friends and the ability to say no without guilt. I deserve to take up space, to have opinions, to exist loudly instead of quietly. We all do. Every woman who's been slowly erased, every woman who's given everything and received nothing, every woman who's looked in the mirror and wondered where she went. We all deserve better than resignation, better than silent treatment, better than being someone's second choice in our own lives. So here's what I need to tell you. What I learned the hard way, what I wish someone had told that woman in the yellow cardigan sitting alone on her front porch, wondering why she felt so empty. This is what I know now about helping someone who's where I was. If you know someone who's disappearing, someone who's giving too much and getting too little, someone who makes excuses for treatment they'd never tolerate if they were watching it happen to a friend, here's what you need to do. First, believe them. When they tell you something's wrong, even if they're still making excuses, even if they're not ready to leave, even if they immediately backtrack and say it's fine, believe that first thing they said. That's the truth trying to get out. Second, don't judge the timeline. Everyone leaves when they leave. Some people need one conversation. Some need 50. Some people leave the first time something happens. Some people need years to gather their strength. Your job isn't to rush them or shame them or wonder why they're taking so long. Your job is to be there consistently, to keep showing up, to keep offering support. Third, help with practical things. Information about lawyers, numbers for domestic violence hotlines, knowledge about how to open a bank account someone else can't access, how to document incidents, how to make a safety plan. Emotional support is crucial, but practical help is what makes leaving possible. Fourth, stay safe yourself. If someone is dangerous, if there's violence or threats, you can't help anyone if you become a target too. This doesn't mean abandoning someone. It means being smart about how you offer support. And here's the thing nobody tells you, the thing I had to learn by living through it. Studies confirm that 65% of all abuse cases involve female victims. 65%. And that's just the cases that get reported, that get counted, that show up in statistics. It doesn't count women like I was, women who convinced themselves it wasn't that bad. Women who thought what they were experiencing didn't count as abuse because there were no bruises, no broken bones, just a slow erosion of self. And here's what made me sick when I learned it. Studies show that 11% experienced physical abuse. 11%. 1 in 10 women. That's not emotional manipulation and financial control and slow erasure. That's violence. That's someone putting their hands on someone else. That's danger beyond what I faced. And what I faced was already more than anyone should have to survive. Those numbers mean something important. If you're living through something like what I described, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're part of a massive, mostly hidden population of women who are being systematically erased, controlled, manipulated, and hurt. And if you know someone going through it, the statistics mean you're definitely not the only one who knows someone in this situation. Look around your church, your workplace, your neighborhood. Someone there needs help. Someone there is making excuses for unacceptable treatment. Someone there is giving away their pension money and their self-respect and their right to exist fully in their own life. So what do? You speak up. You share stories like mine. You create spaces where people can tell the truth without fear of judgment. You learn the signs, the patterns, the ways abuse shows up when it's wearing a suit and driving a nice car and going to church every Sunday. You become someone safe. Someone who believes victims. Someone who doesn't ask, "Why didn't you just leave?" but instead asks, "What do you need?" Someone who understands that leaving is a process, not an event, and that the most dangerous time is often right after someone leaves. And if you're the person who needs help, if you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, here's what I need you to hear. You're not too old. You're not too tired. You're not too trapped. You're not too anything. You're enough exactly as you are, and you deserve better than what you're getting. Start small. Open a bank account they don't know about. Make copies of important documents. Talk to one trusted friend. Call one hotline. Take one step, even if it's tiny, even if it feels pointless, even if you're not sure you'll ever take another step after it. That first step is everything. It's you choosing yourself. It's you saying your life matters. It's you beginning the journey back to whoever you were before you started disappearing. I'm sitting here now on my porch in my historic neighborhood, the spring air warm and full of possibility. My yellow cardigan fitting just right. My grandchildren's quilts folded on the chair beside me. I'm watching the light change as evening comes on. Gospel music playing from inside the apartment. The smell of grits drifting through the open window. And I'm thinking about that woman who sat alone on a different porch a year ago, watching the neighborhood wake up, wondering why she felt so empty, not yet knowing that her life was about to fall apart and come together all at once. I want to tell her, it's going to be hard, harder than you can imagine. You're going to doubt yourself 1,000 times. You're going to be scared. You're going to wonder if you made the right choice. You're going to have moments where resignation feels easier than fighting. But you're also going to discover you're stronger than you knew. You're going to find allies in unexpected places, starting with yourself. You're going to learn that you can be your own rescue. You're going to sleep peacefully for the first time in years. You're going to look in the mirror and recognize the woman looking back. And you're going to help other people. Your story, your truth, your hard-won wisdom, it's going to matter. It's going to reach someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's sitting alone wondering if they're crazy. someone who's giving away their savings and their voice and their life. So this is me, reaching out across time and space to anyone who needs this message. You can do this. You're not alone. Help exists. Change is possible. Life is waiting for you on the other side of this, and it's better than you can imagine from where you're sitting right now. Have you lived this? Do you know someone who has? Drop a comment if this resonates with you. Your story matters. Your voice matters. You matter. And please hit that like button and subscribe. Not for me, but so this message reaches the person who needs it today. The person who's wondering if they're the only one. The person who's about to look in the mirror and decide they deserve better. Because they do. And so do you.